All right, I'm going to start with an introduction about what publications are and some of the basics about working with publications, the difference between publications and headings, shared headings, just some concepts to begin with. And then we're going to have probably a full hour of hands-on of how various settings and searches and so on work with publications and headings. I'm not going through today, or I don't have on my agenda today, doing print materials using publications. So there can be another session in the future on working with print materials and creating search or print material indexes using general headings, but that's not part of today's agenda. Another, future training session need. If you do need print material training and you would like to see that on my agenda, please make sure you take advantage of the Suggest a Training session that we send out in the training newsletter every month to let me know that that's a need you have. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what publication codes, just in case we do have a few people who are relatively new to it and don't understand, first of all, why on earth we call it publication codes. So publication codes have been around certainly as long as I've been involved in the sector, and that's quite a long time now. And I believe this goes back even to the 70s. And originally, of course, it was for actual publication, printed directories that people would make, either their large community services directories or small pamphlets and smaller things they might create, where they use publication codes to indicate which things belong to which publications. But when I came into CEOC 2002 and did our first big redevelopment of CEOC in 2003, we decided to start repurposing publications for other things, since even at that time the use of printed publications was on a downslide, and the internet as the place for getting this information was going up. So at that time we started reusing publication as a concept for the creation of specialized views in CEOC, where you would be able to say, almost like you would print a flyer and say this is this category of record, that you could do the same thing online and say this is sort of my online flyer with just this category of record. So we've been doing that as far back as 2003. Publications include their own little taxonomy system, which is originally for subject indexes in print publications, and have the appropriate name for that purpose of general headings. And again, this is a case where we've kind of outgrown our original name but haven't changed it. And now general headings are really about creating custom taxonomies for special purposes, where you want to simplify more complex category systems like the ERS taxonomy, or you want to narrow it down to just a very small range of those topics for some particular intention. So we've moved from, create my flyer to sort of create my online flyer, but really a lot of the concepts have stayed the same. And that's part of why we've just transitioned from one to the other while keeping pretty much the same ideas and structures that we originally had for print. So the basic features that a publication has is, first of all, that they have their own management area, their own fields, and their own permissions that are separate from the rest of the record. That means that if you don't own the record, you still, if you have access to that record and are allowed to assign publication codes, you still have the ability to use the publication codes to create your own lists, to add your own categories to those records in a way that's independent of the record itself. So this is particularly useful for record sharing both within the same database but between different agencies, between different members in the same database, and even between internal and external systems as you ship records around from one place to another. By having the idea of publications kind of sit on top of the record, we allow people to interact with that record in the most common use case, which is, we can use 99% of the record, but we need to be able to apply our own lists and categories on top of it. So having it separate allows that use case to work really effectively. Also, when you churn the publication information, it doesn't churn the main record information. So it's clear that if I modify the publication codes, it's not going to make it seem like I've actually updated that record in any way, because it's really a separate editorial process, and the permissions can be completely different. Individual users or agencies can be given partial editorial access to publication codes, meaning you don't necessarily have access to all the publication codes in the record or even all the publication codes in your database. The way that it's set up is different people can exclusively own a publication and be the only ones allowed to assign it, meaning that you have the ability to have some protection over a code that you create and know that no one else is going to add or remove it from records or change the content of that publication code. But it also means that you can share it with others if you are working cooperatively with another group and you both need to interact with the same list. So depending on what you need, you can have quite a wide variety of setups there to have anything from completely restricted to fully open, and many different levels in between that. So the general heading system I talked about earlier, which used to do the equivalent of a subject index or category index in printed publications, now allows us to do, you may have, if you use the Ayers taxonomy, you may have heard of something like a folksonomy, which is a way of simplifying the taxonomy in particular for the public, but can also be really useful for staff as a concept, where you kind of hide the complexity of classification systems that you're using underneath that provide really good keyword indexing and meaning to your records, but can be a bit overwhelming for a simple category-based search. So using general headings allows you to draw on the good things about your taxonomy, create custom lists that are not based on the taxonomy, so that could be particular agencies or even hand-pick records that you've created that you are making your own category for that you cannot do with the taxonomy, and you can combine all of those things together to create a comprehensive list of topics that apply for your public site or your staff or a third-party client, whatever the case may be. And finally, we've built a bunch of search tools around publications, including obviously the quick list on the front page, that most people are using some kind of quick list, either based on publications or headings. And our topic search also allows you to use general headings to combine potentially lists from a couple of different publications to do more focused searching on some kind of subtopic in your database. One of the questions I get asked most about publication codes is, what is the difference between a publication code and a distribution code? Distributions are the same basic concept of assigning a code to a record to create a list, but there's no sophistication to distribution codes. It's just a code. It's just a list. Originally, this would have been for the purpose of shipping your records around, exporting various purposes, not print publications, but for other ways that you need to move data around and make lists for that purpose. And the codes are very, very similar in terms of their structure, but there's no general headings. And the distribution code editing has no separate permissions from the regular editing of the record, meaning it's a direct part of the record updating process, and you have to have permission to update the record in order to assign distribution codes. Likewise, when you add a distribution code, that's considered a modification of the record, although I may be changing that. But for now, the modification of the distribution code is part of the record updating process in every way, meaning that if you modify the list of distributions, you're also modifying the modification date of the record itself. You cannot edit distribution codes unless you have management permission on that record, which means that it's impossible for someone who doesn't have editorial permission to use distribution codes to make a list of other people's records, for example. Any questions about the before I move on from that, are there any questions about the differences between publication and distribution codes? Or if you need me to slow down or anything, please shout out. I have a lot of content, so I may zoom on, but if I'm going too fast, just flag me. Publication management is a permission within the user type. So not everybody has publication permissions, and not everybody will have the same publication permissions, even if they have some level. So depending on what your permissions are, you'll have access to different pieces of publication editing. So if you can't edit a specific publication code, there are going to be one of a few reasons. It might be owned by another agency in your database. So that's the 3-letter record owner code that someone has created that publication, said they exclusively own it, and that means nobody but them is allowed to assign that publication code or to make modifications to it. It might be owned by another member in your same database if you're in a multi-member database, and they haven't opened it for shared editing by others. So it exists in your database, might not be exclusively owned by a specific agency, but it is owned by sort of a member in a multi-member database. And then we have a concept of a limited view user. A limited view user only has access to one publication code, and that is not going to be one of them. So limited view users may be given publication management permission, and by that I mean editing the publication itself. I'm not talking about records yet. So they may be given permission to edit publication data, but if they're in a limited view when they log in, they'll only be allowed to edit the headings and settings of that one publication, the one that sort of defines their limited view. So there are 2 places to get to publication editing, and I'm going to go through the whole process shortly. One is from your main menu. If you have permissions, you'll actually see the publications link from the main menu of the database. And you can also find it in the setup area under the classifications setting. If you need to edit headings, those are edited from within the specific publication that owns those headings. So this will apply to everyone in Ontario, but not anyone outside of Ontario at this time, or not even everyone in Ontario. The majority of people in Ontario are in a shared database. And in a shared database, we have the concept of shared publications. What that means is a publication code that doesn't belong to just one member of the database. It's one that can be applied by any of the members in the database. That doesn't mean that everybody can edit them. So by default, a shared heading is locked down to global super users, those who have permission to edit shared aspects of the database. Shared publications can be opened up for editorial permissions to others in the database, but that is a risky setting, because as soon as you do that, if there isn't an agreement to coordinate what kinds of changes are allowed, it may be that one group makes a modification that another group is not pleased with. And so although that option is there to have a publication editable in multiple memberships of the same database, you have to be aware that as soon as you open that up, that you're allowing anyone to come who has publication editing permissions to come in and make modifications to that particular publication. So by default, those shared publications are locked down to a global super user, but you can open it up. And I'll show you how to do that when we actually look at the editing form. If there are shared publications that you do not want, so suddenly someone adds a shared publication to your database and it shows up in your list of publications and you're thinking, what is this? You need to hide it, and I'll show you where to do the hiding. But the other point here is that's not kind to your fellow users of your database, and so you shouldn't be creating shared publications unless you need to, because as soon as that happens, it's going to show up for everyone. Now the good news is that only the global super users can create shared publications, so that means that you're not going to have a free-for-all of people just being able to create these publications that show up in other people's lists. It is controlled by the sort of overall administrator of a shared database so that only they can make that choice to have a publication be shared. But if you're working on a project where more than one member in the database, like Halton and Niagara and Haldimand, are all working on the same project, they need to share that publication code. So that's the case where you ask your global super user to make that code shared, and then all three of those members would have access to that publication code. Now, myself as a global super user, if I get that request, I will go in and I will automatically hide it for everyone else that I know isn't part of the project, so that it doesn't suddenly show up, as I say, in other people's lists unexpectedly. But if that does ever happen, you can go and hide it. This will be more clear when we actually look at the forms and report. So a little about deleting publications and headings, and again, we'll actually do some hands-on with this after I get through my spiel here. You cannot delete either publications or headings until you have removed all the places that those items are being used. So that's both within records, but also potentially within views. If you have quick lists or publication views that are using those items, you won't be able to get rid of the publications or headings until you have cleared out all the places where those things are being used. The edit form will tell you where those are being used, and in fact, the print list of publications and headings also tells you how many things are using that item, so that you know kind of what's left to clear out if you need to get rid of it. And you can use the search tools, including deleted records, to identify records that you need to clear the headings or the publication codes out of, which you can do in bulk from the search results. Taxonomy-based headings are automatically assigned based on the taxonomy, and therefore you don't have to clear them out first before you delete them. So that's the one exception. If the heading is taxonomy-based, you can't either add or remove those kinds of headings manually, and therefore anytime you want to get rid of them, you can. And that, in part, that's because if you did delete a taxonomy-based heading, all you would have to do to recreate it is put the taxonomy search back in, and it would re-index to all the records automatically. So it's not really easy to accidentally lose data there because it's so easy to recreate. Many of you have already been through the process with me at least once, maybe a couple of times, of pruning your list of publications and headings. In case you thought that was arbitrary or just because the list looked untidy, there is a really large performance and maintenance effort impact from letting your list of publications and headings get cluttered. So in a database like the Ontario database, which has probably over 1 million publication assignments in it, I'm not kidding, that's a lot of data for the system to have to go through in order to provide various kinds of searching to the end user. And when you leave publications and headings that you aren't using in the list, you're actually degrading performance, not just for yourself, but everybody else in your database and the public. So besides it just looking bad or making it harder for your staff to figure out what they're supposed to assign to records because they forget what all of those publications and headings are for, it also will give you a better experience in your database when you go to search that information if you keep your lists under control. The best way to do that is to create notes every time you create a publication code, even if it's a temporary or test. And in fact, even more so if it's a temporary or test publication, notes are going to help you figure out in the future why you created that, what it's for, and what you are supposed to do with it. If it is a temporary thing that you're expecting to remove in a week, a proper note would be temporary publication, delete by, and then put a week from today. And then schedule a quarterly review. And every quarter, go through those notes, go through your publication list, and prune it. And doing that on a regular basis means you're never going to get in the situation of having 200 publication codes and not remembering what 90% of them do. So having a regular schedule on which you go through your list, prune out any of the ones that you no longer need, is going to keep the performance of your database up. It's going to make it easier on your data management staff to know what they're supposed to apply to records and just overall make life easier. So it sounds like an annoying new thing to have to remember to do, but it will have a really positive overall benefit. And if you get used to the habit of doing it regularly, I think you'll find that it's actually not a big burden to do. One of the things you can do specifically with headings, if you find yourself reusing the same list of headings over and over again against multiple publications, it's time to start thinking about having a heading list that's global, applied to all of your records, and just using that in your quick list, which I'll show you how to do today. That still lets you have a publication-based view to limit what shows up in your view in terms of records, but means that you don't have to create or maintain separate lists of headings for each one of those publications. That won't always work. Sometimes you need to prune that list down, and that doesn't make sense. But if it does, if you're literally using exactly the same list for multiple publication codes, that's not an efficient solution. So that signals that it's time to have a different perspective about how to maintain that list of headings. All right, time to actually look at the publications management stuff and see how this works, which is always much better than hearing me go on about it. All right, I expect I'll mostly be working in my own database today, which, fair warning, I have active development going on in this database, and it would shock me to never run into an issue. So fair warning, things may be broken in my test application that I'm working on today, but I think I did a quick check of all of the publication things, and nothing seems to be out of order today, so we should be good. I'm going to start with a little bit about the basics of publication management, and we're going to do that by creating a brand new publication. So if you have permissions for publications, you'll have it in your left-hand menu on the main page, but you can also find it under, yeah, I have my screen showing good. Everyone can find it under classification systems and publications if you have setup permissions and can go to the setup screen. It's not necessary to have full setup permissions to have publication management permissions, and that's why we also have it on the main menu and not just the setup page. I'm working in a shared database, so do not be confused if you're not working in a shared database and you don't see any of these things like make shared. This is just specifically for a multi-member database where there's sort of walled areas between members in the same database. So when you go to manage publications, you'll see, first of all, a list of publications that your membership in the database owns. If you're not in a shared database, this is all you will see, is this top section here. It's going to list all the codes, the names if applicable, whether or not they're non-public. If they have headings, there will be a link to view a report of those headings. I'll open that in a second. How many local records are using them, again, in a shared database only. That doesn't apply if you're not in a shared database. And other records, only if you're in a shared database. This is other people in your same database who have assigned this publication code to their records, or you have assigned it to their records that are shared with you. And again, local views means your own views. It may be that other views in the database are using that publication code that are sort of another member in your database. You can do a print version of this, which summarizes not just yours, but also shared and the full list. So if I do the print version, I get the comprehensive list of them all together. If it's a hidden shared publication, it's going to have a slash through, like you see here. That's what that means. I have access to this publication code, but I don't want access to this publication code, and it appears in my print list with slash. Besides, so everything on this page are publications I'm allowed to assign to records in my database in some way. At the very bottom in a shared database, you get to view the list, or a global super user will get to see the list of publications owned by other members and has the ability to make them shared so that everyone has access to that publication code. So I'm going to start by adding a brand new publication, and we're going to call this publication our test mental health publication. Again, you're going to want to provide some kinds of notes about what you're doing. Important to decide right off the bat whether this is a public or non-public publication, because if you present your publication field anywhere to the actual public, you do not want some of these things showing up in that list. So it's worth taking a second every time to confirm whether or not that publication is appropriate for the public or not. Most people at this point are steering away from showing publications to the public and sticking with headings and taxonomy and other things. So this is a little bit less relevant than it used to be when many people drove their quick list off publications. We're really encouraging people to steer away from that and go more towards using headings for their quick list. So this is less essential than it used to be, but still worth consideration. In general, having a friendly name for your publication is going to be helpful. Not everyone can necessarily remember the code, so having something descriptive is always a good assistance and obviously looks better for display. So we'll call this add it. There's my new publication code. It's not assigned to any views, not used by any records, so at the moment I still have a delete button. One of the first things I'm going to do here is I know that the way I'm going to use this particular publication is I'm going to want to have it display in the record as a field. And so I'm going to create fields based on this publication. There are 5 different kinds of fields that you can create. The first is a publication description. This is a free text field that would appear on data entry forms only when that record is assigned to that publication. So if you had to collect a special text field but only on records that fell under a specific category, a publication description field will do that for you. It will mean that that feedback form is only going to show this special description that you need if you have tagged the record as requiring it. So this is a good way to do selective data collection. If not everything in your database needs some particular piece of information, you can use publication fields so that those fields only show up when the record falls under that category. So I'm going to go ahead and create myself a description field. If you are using non-public headings or non-public heading groups, then you can use the non-public versions of headings and heading groups. So headings, of course, are the actual categories that you're going to assign to records. A heading group allows you to take a number of those headings, cluster them together, and assign them to a top-level category. I'll show you how to do that here in just a second. In my case, I only need public ones. I'm not going to do any non-public headings, so I'm not going to bother creating a non-public version of my headings field. But I am going to use groups, so I'm going to create a heading groups field as well. While I'm at it, it's time to start creating some heading groups for myself because I know I'm going to want to cluster my headings into 3 categories. We're going to do one for counseling, and I'm not sure what I can use. I'm just going to randomly pick some icon here. I'm going to do one for mental health. and I'm going to do one for addiction or substance use disorder. I guess I'll just call it addiction. I won't use the taxonomy version of it. And I have no idea what I'm going to use here. So if I have no idea what I'm going to use for my icon, and there's unfortunately limited places where the icons work, although that's going to change, I'm sure, I can use the browse icons to browse the full list of what's available. There are a ton, just a ridiculous quantity, and I'm not going to spend all day trying to find the perfect thing. So I'm just going to randomly pick one for today. So now I've created all of my fields here, my description field, my headings field, my heading groups field, and I've created my 3 heading groups. So those are going to be my top level categories under which I'm going to put all of my general headings. At the moment, they're going to sort alphabetically. So you'll see addictions pop to the top, and then counseling, and then mental health. If I decide this is the wrong order, I can use the order field to change that. The orders don't have to be unique. It's a relative ordering. So what you want to do is kind of cluster them in groups, and then they'll sort alphabetically within those groups. So in order to make counseling pop to the top, I need to make the other 2 have a number higher than 0, but they can have the same number, and then it's going to sort addictions, mental health. So if I go down, I now have counseling first, then addictions, then mental health. If I wanted to get really explicit, I could do 1, 2, 3, and really force them in a particular order. So now that I've created I have my publication field, which I'm going to show you how to rename and use in a little bit. I've got my name of my publication. I've got my groups. I don't have any actual headings. I have several ways to start creating headings from here. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the kinds of headings that we support. So there's 3 kinds of headings. I'm going to bring us back to browsing some headings in one of these here. There's 3 kinds of headings, and they're denoted in the used category if you're looking at a report of headings. Can everyone see this, or is this font too small? If anyone can't read and needs the font zoomed in, please let me know. Let's zoom in one here. So T means that this is a taxonomy-based heading. A taxonomy-based heading can't be assigned to records because it is assigned automatically, and therefore it is not a used heading. A used heading is manually assigned to records, so you decide when a record belongs to that category by manually attaching it to that record. And the third category is an unused general heading. What the heck would that be for? So that flies back to the days of print publications, and we still use this in our print tools for a subject index. It's basically a use instead or a use reference. If you're familiar with other thesaurus and taxonomy systems, it's a way of saying instead of using this topic, use these other topics.
This session is being recorded for audio issue reporting. If you don't want to be recorded, mute yourself. You may also leave the session.
Sorry, I was just informed by GoToMeeting that they're monitoring and recording our session for audio monitoring purposes, and the audio is interrupted. I apologize. I hope everyone can hear me now. Can I have a hand that everyone can hear me now? Thank you. Sorry for that interruption. I don't know what's going on. That was new to me. Okay, so an unused heading, again, can't be assigned to a record. It's a use reference or a use instead, a similar concept to many other taxonomy or thesaurus types of systems that you might be familiar with. Same thing. We don't actually use that in any of our searching tools. We use it exclusively for print index creation at this point, although I won't rule out eventually.
Audio issue recording has finished.
Sorry, that was GoToWebinar again interrupting me to tell me they were recording. I apologize. They're going to hear from me about that one. Okay. Moving on. I can't even remember what I was saying. Oh, that I won't rule out at some point that we might use that in the same way that we use references for our classification systems like the thesaurus or the taxonomy. Okay, so I'm going to remove this icon thing here. So now that we understand sort of the three kinds of headings we can create, I'm not going to make an unused heading today, although I'll point out how we do that. I'm going to start by creating taxonomy headings, and then I'm going to show you how to create a manually assigned heading, and we'll kind of see what the difference is between those. There's two ways to create taxonomy headings. I'm going to start with the easiest, which is our quick add. So at the bottom of the screen here, you'll see three different creates. We've got create new heading, create new taxonomy heading, and quick add. So I'm going to click quick add, which is fabulous because it's the absolute lazy way to create indexes. And I'm going to start by adding all of my counseling to, I'm just going to do a top level here. I'm going to add RD and RF, submit, and that will have created two new headings for me right off the bat: counseling approaches, counseling settings. I'm going to edit them. I'm going to add them to my group. So I'm going to add them to the group counseling. And if I want to, I could choose to assign an icon to my heading. I'm not going to in this case. And if I decided I needed to edit my taxonomy search that is driving this particular heading, I can do that here as well. I'm not going to do that right now. I can also do a non-public or public setting, change the displayed order, and so on. For now, I'm just going to submit it. Just a little note here, related headings is another case of, this is something we use exclusively for our print index tools for now. Although we might use them for something else in the future. If you're not using print tools, do not bother doing related headings because you won't be able to use that for anything. You could do it for your own reference purposes, I guess, but we're not using this for searching at the moment, only for subject index tools. So we'll do the same, adding to a category with our counseling settings here. So I'm going to add it to my counseling group. So right now, this is attached to exactly 0 records because nothing belongs to my test and mental health category. So this is a pretty useless thing for me right now. What I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to add everything in the mental health and addictions branch to this to this publication code so that we can start to see actual counts of this being used. So I'm going to do that. Actually, I'll do it from here. I'm going to find all the things in R, which is probably a lot. Yep. So we've got about 5,500 in this database that belong to that branch. Let it finish loading here. That's a lot. So loading. Okay, I think we're loaded now. Okay. And I'm going to assign these to my publication code. I'm going to come back to this later, so don't worry if you're not following it. So I'm going to find, where's my publication code here? Mental health and addictions. Okay. So now that I've done that, let's have a look again. I'm going to reload this page. Now, my general heading is used by 838 records, but I didn't actually assign that general heading to anything. It was automatically assigned as soon as I added the records to the publication code, because a taxonomy-based heading uses your taxonomy indexing of the record that you've already done to assign headings to records, saving you, hopefully, tons of time in creating your own lists. You can instead create taxonomy-based searches that drive your headings, and you don't have to go in and manually assign headings to records. I know for some people that should save them a huge ton of work if you start converting over to doing it that way. So let's go back to our publication. We can now see that this publication is being used by 5,436 organization and program records. And of course, we already saw, we can review in our general headings list here, that we've now got our T headings. That means they're taxonomy based, they're in the group counseling, and I can see how many records I've assigned to those items. Okay, I'm going to take a second now and actually let's have a look at those headings and see how we're doing so far. So I'm actually going to switch gears a little, and I'm going to go into view management. So this is the view that I'm working in right now, and I'm going to start making use of some of the view setup features to actually see the results of my work. I'm going to do two things here. I'm going to, one, add those publication fields that I created to my view so that I can see them. And two, I'm going to add or create my quick list on my front page that to be drawn from this particular publication. So we'll start with going to the very bottom of our view form, which is where we edit our fields. I'll go to my details fields. I'm going to find, what would it be called? We'll look for desk. There we go. There's my description field, my heading group field, and my headings. And I'm going to add these to, put them in publication, description, and headings category. Okay. I'm also going to add some of them to my update and feedback forms, or I'll probably just do update forms for now, but so same thing. I'm going to find oh, I got to do just headings. Oh, and here's a shared database caveat. Those new fields started out as hidden. I need to unhide them. In a shared database, new fields begin as not available. So could be oh no, they're not hidden. We should be seeing them. Let's have a look again. Or feedback, at least. There we go. They are there. So again, I'll add them to publication descriptions. So groups doesn't show up because you can't actually assign groups to records. They're determined based on the heading. So you can use the groups for display, but not for updating. Like they're not an updatable field because they're calculated based on the headings assigned to records. So that's why you only see description and headings here. Enough for me to be able to show you how that works. So let's go back to my main menu here. I'll submit these. Oh, I didn't do the quick list. I'm going to switch my quick list to show my new list here, test mental health, submit it. Reload my main page. And now I have my group, which is counseling, and under my group I can see my 2 taxonomy-based headings that I created, and I can click on them to search. I can also, in this case, my view setting says I can search the whole group, so I have search all in this category, and if I click that, then I would get both of those items, approaches and counseling settings. Let's go back to the publication. I'm going to show you another way to add some taxonomy headings. So this time we'll add one in the addictions category. So I'll create a new taxonomy general heading from scratch. So this is not through the Quick Add tool. This is manually creating a taxonomy-based heading. So the first thing I'm going to do is say add remove terms. There was a little button. I'll do that again. So add remove terms, and I clicked it, popped up, and we have a hands up. Do you want me to unmute you, or do you want to use the, oh no, here we go. Do I have a new hands up, or was that an old one? I put everyone's hands down. If anyone's still got a hands up, let me know. Okay. So this is how we're manually creating a new taxonomy-based term. I'm going to do a search exactly like I would do if I was doing an advanced taxonomy search. It's exactly the same. So I can do drill down, I can do by code, I can link terms together, I can do a full, you know, it has to be in this list or any from this list. Anything that I can do in a regular taxonomy advanced search, I can do to build a general heading. So in my case, I'm going to create a list for things that support addiction. So I'll go under substance use disorder, and I'm going to try and combine a few different things to see if I can find ones that look similar. Let's have a look here. It doesn't really matter. Let's say I'm going to combine detoxification in my Match Any. So either detoxification or treatment programs. And I might pick one more. We'll do residences. I'm just randomly picking some things, so may not be logical. We won't worry about that yet. When I have it the way I want, and again, it can be a mixture of must match any from, you can link terms together, anything you can normally do with a taxonomy search you can do here. So I'm going to save it. By default, I can have it generate a taxonomy or a name based on my taxonomy search, but there are limits. So here, it's not going to allow me to say use taxonomy term name because I've picked too many things. This is not a logical name in order to generate it. But if I picked a single taxonomy term, I may just want to have it use the taxonomy term. And the great thing about that is if the taxonomy term gets updated, so there's a new release of the taxonomy and the name has changed, that will actually automatically populate through to your general headings if you're directly using the name. So you don't even have to worry about maintaining the name of a single term if you're using that term. So I'm going to say this is all fine, I like this. I'm going to add it to the group, addictions. I have to give it a name because I can't automatically use this, so I'll say treatment program. I'll be more specific. That would be good if I could spell. So you'll notice in one click, it's assigned to 730 records. So that's how fast it was, and my computer is not fast. It was assigned, the second I submitted it, it was instantly assigned to 730 records and is available for search and use. So if I go back to my front page and I reload, now I have two. I have my counseling, I have my addictions, and I begin to see other things in my list. And if I then kept going with this into my third category, I would see that there as well. So I'll close these up for a minute. So speaking of my third category, let's say that I need one in our final category, which is mental health, which is manually assigned to records. So none of the taxonomy branches quite do what I want it to do for this particular case. So it's a case where I need to manually be able to assign this taxonomy term to records. So I'm going to create a regular heading this time. That's the third option at the bottom of the form. I'm going to do create new general heading. And I don't get the option to do taxonomy. If you create it as a taxonomy term, it's forever a taxonomy term. And if you create it as a manually assigned term, it is forever a manually assigned term. If you need to move between the two, you need to first create your new heading and then copy whatever you need to copy, or if it's a taxonomy term, you don't have to copy anything because it's automatically assigned, and then remove the old one. So there's no way to convert between a taxonomy term and a not taxonomy term. So unfortunately, if you want to switch over, you just have to create a whole new thing with taxonomy terms and then get rid of your manually assigned ones. Okay, so here's my manually assigned term. We'll call this mental health support. Again, I could pick an icon for that if I wished. I'm not going to in this case. It's a used heading. So again, I said earlier you have used or unused as the option. An unused heading can't be assigned to records. It's purely for saying instead of using this term, use these other terms, and that only works in subject indexes for print right now. So I'm going to put this in my heading group, mental health. Heading groups are not required here, so I could have this not in a heading group. Let's start with that so I can show you what happens when it's not in a heading group. So it's not assigned to any records, but I'm still going to be able to get it on my search form. So it immediately appeared at the top level. So if you're using a mix of things in groups and not in groups, the difference will be these will open, or I'll show you a few other ways that these display, because this is new. Then it will kind of be at the top level and you'll see the things underneath. If it's not in a category, it appears top level. And in this case, if I click it, it's going to go directly to a search. I haven't assigned it to any records. So that's the difference. It's not opening up because it's not in a group, so it's a direct access, versus these ones that open up. This is the top level category, and it's going to open up to show the actual headings underneath. So if I'm going to put this in its category, so we'll go back here and assign it to its group. Okay, so there it is. But of course, this currently has no records. So let's talk about how we assign general headings to records. And this will double as the same way that we assign publication codes to records. So I'll pick some, we'll start with the taxonomy search. So let's say I want most of the things in this category, but not all of them. So I can go, I have select checkbox enabled, which is how I can do this. If you don't know how to do that, change display options, and you want to click off the select checkbox option here. So I'll pick a few here, it doesn't matter. I'm going to, from my drop-down, pick add remove heading. You'll see there's also add remove pub code here, so that's how I would do it with a publication to a group of records. I'm going to pick the publication from which I want to assign headings, so that in this case it's my mental health and addictions publication. And here we can see how unpleasant this would be if I had 200 things in the list. So again, our argument of why it's terrible to have giant lists of publications. It makes it really hard on staff to actually do the management. So I'm going to get into synchronize later. For now, we're just going to do add. You can see I only get one option. This is the only heading that isn't automatically assigned.
This session is being recorded for audio issue reporting. If you don't want to be recorded, mute yourself. You may also leave the session.
Sorry, again, GoToWebinar is doing the interruption to record me. My apologies. So I can only see this one because the other ones are taxonomy based and therefore can't manually be assigned to records. I'm going to add my mental health support. It's added to 7 records. So let's use this as an opportunity to see what this looks like in the record. So hopefully this is one of the ones I added it to. Let's see. Yes, I did. Okay. So I created my publications fields and I added them to my view. They look terrible right now, although you can see that they're there. And then there's a question. Oh, just saying we lost audio again.
Audio issue recording has finished.
Sorry again. I'm really sorry. I'm furious. I just let it go if you hear it, because it sounds like this is going to keep going. So my apologies. This is probably going to repeat again. So you can see I've got my searchable heading groups and headings showing up, which is fabulous, but this looks horrible. They're named in a really unuseful way. So let's take a second here, and I'm going to show you how to fix that. So we fix the name of fields from field setup, field display. I'm going to find, here they are, 1, 2, 3. We'll call this, I'm going to call this one, and I'll call this one, okay, submit that. So again, I'm in the field display from the setup. Let's have another look at that record. Much better. Okay. So these are searchable, clickable categories, both the main category and the subcategory. I can execute that search. And if I went to my report about my headings now, wrong thing. If I went to my report about my headings for that particular heading, it would show that particular one as used. And if I reload here, I can now see that it's being used by 7 records. So that's the basics of creating headings. Does anyone have any questions about the process of not management and records yet, but just the process of creating a publication or a heading and editing the contents of the publications or headings? So the icons within the headings themselves, if we take a quick look, if I add an icon here, then for anywhere that it actually shows the general heading icons, I'll actually see that icon when it pops out as well. Most of our searches don't show the icons yet, although I hope to do that. So you'll have not seen this before. It's been kind of secretly hiding for the last couple of weeks in your system. If you haven't seen this particular search form for doing this version of your quick list, it is available in your database now, so you can start to use it if you wish. Let's have a look at what a more traditional view of headings looks like in many of our other forms. So I'll switch to another view. So what many of you will see for your quick list is either a drop-down or a bunch of checkboxes for your headings. So this case, we have groups and searchable groups. These are not in a group. This is a group, and these are the things in that group. If the heading group was not searchable, this would be black and in italics, and you wouldn't be able to click on it. If you have checkboxes, you'll see a list of those checkboxes in all different kinds of orientation. So I'm going to take you through a little bit about how to configure your quick list after we talk about management and records, so that if you want to customize how that looks on your search forms, you can know how to make those changes. So I got a little bit into how to manage from the search results. So I'm going to continue with that actually. Let me go back to my main menu here, my own view. So one of the things that you can do with publication codes is something called synchronization. So I'm going to show you the two ways synchronization works. First, we're going to set up in our publication we were working on. I'm going to sort of pollute it with some other information here. I'm going to do copy general headings. So I'm going to copy general headings from, see something manually assigned, we'll pick CCAC. You can pick the things that you want to copy. So this includes taxonomy-based headings. So if you pick a taxonomy-based heading to copy, it's going to copy those taxonomy codes, automatically assign them to records, and so on. In this case, I'm picking headings that have to be manually assigned to the record so that I can demonstrate how to do synchronization within the records. So I'll pick just two of these. Hopefully some of them actually have data. I'll pick a few of them. It's now, every time I come here, it's going to show me the cases where I've already done a match between these two publications and added them, and the ones that are not added. Changes aren't populated through. So if I made a change to one of these in the original source publication, it's not going to carry through to the publication where I copied the headings. And that's why, although this is a useful tool, I want to encourage you to use more global lists of headings where you can, where it makes sense, rather than doing copying. A good reason to copy is you have a big list of 200, and in this case you only need 5 of them. That's a really good reason to copy, because you can't, the lists are not the same. But if you're literally using the same list, if you were doing check all and you wanted the 2 lists to be identical, that's a sign that this is not the way to do it. Likely you should be using the fields and quick list from one source set of headings for searching purposes and display purposes, and you can still use another publication code to drive which records show up in the view and so on. So here we go. I've copied 3. What that is now going to do for me is I can pick a bunch of these records, and I'll do my add remove heading. I'm going to pick my mental health and addictions. We'll see if any of these records match. And this time I'm going to say synchronize headings to the classifications found in CCAC. It's going to go, there's none, figures. What happens when I do that? In this case there was nothing to do. Let me give it another go here. We're going to try this the hard way. First, let's look up records that have the publication code CCAC. And obviously there's quite a few of them. Maybe that those headings were not good. So let's I'm going to try this again with more headings in the list and see how we do. 25. Okay. So I just picked records that didn't, or headings that didn't actually have any records assigned to them. So if I go to my previous search results, do, I'm going to my advanced search page. If I want to see those 25 records that I just did synchronization on, I'm going to go to publications. I'm going to do the drop down. I'm going to look for things that have particular general headings. So I'm going to say general headings. I'll find my publication. And I want to have ones that have any of these ones that I just tried to synchronize. Okay, so I'm going to pick a bunch of them using control clicking. Search. Get my 25 from earlier, and I can actually open them up and have a look down here, and we can see that it added that, it did the synchronization based on records that had been assigned to the CCAC headings because I synchronized between the two publications. It means that if you do have cases where you're trying to replicate a small number of headings from one publication to another, you don't have to manually remember to keep them in sync. You just need to periodically go and do a synchronization from one publication to another, and it will detect the cases where the headings are the same and make sure that they match up. Now the key to that is one of them has to be the master. So you have to say, you know, publication A is the one that we maintain, and publication B we just synchronize. And therefore you don't, because otherwise if you go back and forth, you can end up removing indexing from publication A if you synchronize backwards and went from publication B to publication A. So if you're going to use this tool, which can be very useful, you need to have protocols and really good instructions to the person who does the synchronizing that they always synchronize in the right direction, because otherwise they could end up wiping out indexing work that was done. It's important that you know which one is the master and which one is the one you're going to copy to. Does anyone have questions about doing synchronized headings? If you synchronize taxonomy headings, there's nothing to worry about because you just do it once and you never have to think about it again because publication headings or taxonomy headings aren't manually assigned to records anyway. Okay. So I haven't even gotten in so far with all of this to how we do basic in-record publication editing. So now's our moment. I have permissions to do publication editing, basically blanket publication editing in this case. So I can see update publications. If I was a limited view user, I would see update headings instead of, or update categories instead of update publications. And again, I see a list of publications here. If I was a limited view user, I would not see this. I would go directly to editing the specific publication that I was allowed to manage. So it's going to start by showing you the publications assigned to your record. If there are headings that have been applied for that publication, you'll see it here. If you've added a description or if there's feedback from the public on the headings or description, you would see it here. To add is simple. I pick from the list whatever I want to add. And there it is. And then the one that you want to manage, you pick. So this is so that you can manage the headings or the description. I'm going to pick my mental health publication. And here is where I can add my description. And you can see here it's showing me the ones that are being added automatically because of the taxonomy. So I have that as a reference. So I can either copy the description from the current record as something to edit, or I can manually create any content I want here. If I need to reference information in the record to help me decide how to assign headings or what I should put in the description, I can access a very large majority of the content of the record here. So I can view information that's going to help me decide how to do the indexing from here. Including my category fields. Okay, So I can use that to make decisions about assignments. And I just check off the general headings I want to add. I can't do anything about the taxonomy-based ones because they're added automatically, and I can do my description. So now that I've added my description, if I go back to the record, I now see my mental health description here. Okay, so that's my specialized description that's only going to show up for this particular category of record. Like, I will not get that field for anything else. If I go to the feedback form, you remember that I added these fields to my feedback form. So I have, on my feedback form, I can see the category list here, which I hope to eventually be not a text box, and my specialized description, so that you can get feedback from the public on whether those categories are appropriate or whether the description is appropriate. Probably obvious, but there is a delete button here if you want to be able to remove a publication because you don't want it in a record anymore. And the things that you are allowed to add are based on your permissions and your access to that particular publication. So I'm not going to see publications here that are exclusively owned by another agency or that I don't have permission to access. If my view doesn't allow access to non-public publications, I won't see those here available to add. If my view's got specific list of publication codes that are available in this view, that's what I'll see available for me to add and to edit. So this is a restricted zone, and you don't necessarily see everything here. It is based on permissions and also on my view. Okay, I'm going to, just for myself, bring up my presentation here and make sure I cover all my content. Okay, so I'm going to flip through a little, and you see my front view's now got a really big scattering of stuff. I could collect all of these into a CCAC heading, for example, a group, so that they weren't all showing up as individual items. So I'm going to take a minute and do a couple of switches of templates so we can see how changing our view and our template settings change what's available here for searching. So I'll start by changing my layout. So I'm just going to go into the design template that I'm using, which I think is this one. Maybe not. This one. I'm going to switch to a more traditional search. So that's called the heading panel search. If you like the looks of it and you want to do something similar, this is what you're looking for in your search layout, heading panel search. I'm going to go to the two-panel search. I'm going to go to, change my mind, I'm going to go to single form, which is the simplest. Okay. So most of you are going to have been familiar with this particular form. This is kind of our standard. So by default, we're getting here a drop-down list of categories. I can see my ones that have subcategories and the ones that don't. I can make some changes to that to change how they display. So we're going to go to the view setup here. And I'm going to start by going, instead of doing a drop-down list, I'm going to do checkboxes as our first change. So this is if you want to be able to see, oh, and that's a bug I must have introduced last night, the ordering is wrong. So if you want to be able to see all of your items, you can do it in checklist format. This is currently 4 across. If I decide I don't like that, that's the wrap. So here, wrap checkbox is that. I can change it to 2 instead. There we go. So I want to have fewer across. Right now, the groups are searchable, so there's checkboxes next to the groups. I can change that and say the groups are not searchable, and then you can only search the actual lower level categories. And now there's no checkbox next to the groups. And finally, we can do drop down per group. And I know there's a bug here, so things are not going to be in the right group, but you'll get the idea. Where you have one drop down with uncategorized, in this case I have some of the uncategorized showing up, not up here. That's probably introduced last night in my database. So this list should all be part of this list. But you can see that it'll have the heading group and then a list of everything under that group. So those are your options for a standard search form. You can do one big drop-down list. You can do checkboxes. You can do a bunch of drop-downs, one per category. You can also do a setting to say whether you want multiple selections to be any or all. So depending on the purpose for what you're doing, if I had a group that was diagnosis and another group that was fees, and I wanted it to have to match both things, whatever diagnosis they picked and whatever fee schedule they picked, then I can do, the setting would be drop-down list per group and all selected values. And therefore, whatever they picked in each drop-down, it would have to match both of them. If I said any, then it could match either the thing in the first drop-down or the thing in the second drop-down, and it wouldn't matter. So that's what any or all means. It's most useful with the drop-down list per group. So this setting does not have very good results for the end user for anything but the drop-down list per group. So I don't recommend it for checkboxes, and it's completely useless for drop-down lists because there's only ever one thing to pick there. So I'm going to switch, unless you have any questions on the quick list, I'm going to switch gears to advanced search and go back to the detail about how we do, I showed you quickly how we do some publication searching, but I'll show a little bit more detail. So the advanced search form for people who have access to publications is always going to default to doing a publication search rather than headings. But you'll notice that it's a drop-down, and underneath publications is the list of all of the publications that have headings. So they'll only show up in this list if they have headings. So if you have 300 publications and 2 of them have headings, only 2 are going to show up in this part. So I can pick the one that I want to work with for searching for headings, and publication search works the same way. And I can either include or exclude or both. So I can do a search for find me all the records that don't have any categories, for example, or find me all of the records that have, oh, and by the way, this is only going to apply to things that have that publication. So it's not going to bring up all the records in the whole entire database. Okay. It's only going to bring up the records in that publication code that had no headings. Okay. So if I had done this search and it would just bring up all the records, I would have brought up 45 or 50,000 records here. That's not the way that it works. When you're doing an advanced search, general heading search, it will search the publication code, test mental health, and then whatever headings exclude or include you have. So it's a combination of it has to be in the publication that I picked here and include or exclude the selected headings. So if you want a search that includes all of the cases where you haven't added that publication, that is a different thing entirely. You should do that with a custom field search. So if I wanted to see, and I'm not going to do this, because it would be too many records, but if I wanted to see whether or not it's in the publication code, how many records have that field blank, have no headings, I can actually do that by doing my mental health field as a custom field search. So I'll find it here. Mental health subcategory is no. Okay, so I can do that search, but it's different. And in this case, I'm not going to do it because it's going to bring up too many records. So to exclude, and this and, so whatever I pick here is additive to exclude. So I can say, show me all the ones that have counseling approaches and not addiction treatment programs. And it would combine those two things in order to execute the search. I can hold the control key down to exclude multiple or to include multiple. And again, I can say has all of them, has any of them. And I can do a search for as long as it has one heading. That's what has any is. And the same thing for publication codes, where it's got the has none, has any, include, exclude, works exactly the same way. So that's for doing more sophisticated searching on publications. Okay, we've only got a few minutes left, so I'm going to discuss a little bit about publication security, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. So publication security is a combination of the settings in the view that you're in and that you're originally assigned to, and the settings in your user type. So the view itself is going to say which publications are available and whether or not it is a limited view. And again, a limited view means that only the one publication is available. So let me switch to a view edit form here. So limited view, only allow viewing management of this view's publication. There's a little detail on it here, okay? So if limited view is checked and I've picked a publication for this view, how do I pick a publication for this view? So that's going to be on, there's a sort of a basic setting of it's based on a particular publication. Right here, available records, okay? Only include records in the publication. So whatever I pick here, if I make it a limited view, it's only going to allow me access to that publication. So if I said I'm making my mental health portal, only test mental health records are going to show up in it, and it's a limited view, that means that it's automatically going to generate the quick list from the headings of this publication, and only that one publication is accessible in that view. So someone who had publication editing permissions and was assigned to this view would only be allowed to edit the headings for test mental health, because this is limited view and no access to publications is allowed except to this one publication. So that's why it's a combination of permissions in the user and permissions in the view that they're working in. So also here again, if I say they can only have public publications, that's all they're going to have access to is public. And I can even be specific and list only specific publication codes that I'm interested in. So I could pick 3 or 4 and say, you know, I'm only letting you edit these ones. And that person would then only have access in searches and so on to these specific publication codes and not others. That's in the view setup. So the view that the user is assigned to is going to determine quite a lot of what the access is, and the same for the public. Within the user type, so this is the role that the user is in, there are further publication editing permissions. So the three options are they cannot update publications at all. They can update publication data in the records, meaning they can assign publications and headings to the records, but they can't edit the publications themselves. Or you can give them the user can update all publication data. That means they're allowed to manage the list of publications or headings that they have access to and actually make changes to those headings or the publication itself, not just the data in the records. If you're in a limited view, again, it's going to confine you to general headings from that specific publication, no matter what this says. It's not, you can't be in a limited view and get access to all the publications. You're stuck with just that one list of headings. Okay, so we're in open question time. If you've got a question, I can either unmute you or you can type your question, whatever is most helpful. Does anyone have any questions? I think I covered everything I wanted. Have a quick look here. No questions? Okay. Well, I'm going to stop the recording, and I'll stay on the line for another couple of minutes if anyone does have questions. And of course, you can always follow up with me after the session as well if you have things that occur to you later, or while you're trying to experiment in your own database and you come up with more questions. I know that's often the way it works. So just be in touch if you want some further detail. I've written some pretty extensive page help on most of these pages, so I strongly encourage you to use that as your first point of reference. If you're working in the setup, you should see a link that either says page help, or here next to the name of the page, you'll see this little question mark if you're using one of these templates. And we've got really detailed information about what all of the things mean, how to do specific things with your publications on every page. So that's always a good first stop if you have no idea what you're doing. All right, thanks very much, everyone. Have a really good weekend. I will stick around on the line for 5 more minutes if anyone has any questions they prefer to ask not on the recording. Thanks.